I'm going to read an excerpt from St. Theophan The Recluse's book, The Path to Salvation, translation by Sarah from Rose, and in my PDF file it's just excerpts, and it's from page 97 of my PDF file. It's just a paragraph. Here goes. All the powers of the soul, the mind, the will, and the senses, should gather near the consciousness in the heart. The gathering of the mind in the heart is attention, the gathering of the will is vigilance, and the gathering of the senses is soberness. Now, heart in this case just means the core of one's soul, that's all. And gathering just means focusing one's mind, focusing one's will, and focusing one's senses, that's all. But I like the different words, the different verbs for these things, or nouns from verbs, attention, vigilance, and sobriety, because they distinguish these three different so-called powers of the soul that St. Theophan is describing. And these three powers, that he calls them, they map neatly onto an old classical Platonic model of the soul, which I find very useful in Christian ascetic life. And this model has three parts. The highest part of the soul, according to this model, is the intellective part, which will include the nous and the dianus. And St. Theophan is simply referring to this as a power, which he's calling mind. And according to this old classical model, the middle part of the soul is in Latin we'll call it the irascible part. It's the affective, emotional part. And St. Theophan is referring this to as will. And we'll think of desire as well as will. And the lower part of these three layers of the soul is the physical, appetitive, the body's appetites part. And St. Theophan is referring to these as the powers of our senses, so bodily senses. So, to summarize, St. Theophan is telling us to be attentive with our mind, to be vigilant with our will, and to be sober with our senses. Now, in a way, he's just telling us to just pay attention and be focused. Now, of course, these three things all blend together in practice. And how do they blend together in practice? Well, they actually blend together in sequence. With your mind, you will organize intelligently and intelectively everything. And part of that everything will include that second layer of your soul, the irascible affective part, where you will employ your will. So you will use your mind to employ your will. So there is an order here of priority. And subsequently in third place, there will be your bodily senses or your senses of perception, the appetitive part, which you will bring your mind to bear on and also your will to bear on as well. So there is an order of application when we come to blend these three things all together. But for now, what we'll do is we will just regard them statically and separately. So we're going to start with the mind, the intellective part, the nous and the dianus, but immediately we've hit a problem, because with your mind you're going to have to organize the external aspects of your life as well as the internal parts of your soul. And the world that St. Theophan lived in is very different from the world that we live in. So, like for example, his country and his empire was a monarchical one, and the monarch was Christian Orthodox. The whole country was Christian Orthodox. The polity was unified. The economy was asset based. what are we living in? What kind of parishes are we attending to? What kind of families do we have now? So we have to follow St. Theophan's advice and bring our mind and attention to bear on the external activities and circumstances of our life, our relationships, our parish, our jobs, the places that we live. And now, why is that important? It's important because he's going to go on to talk about what you do with your mind with regard to the internal aspects of your soul. Now, how you do that internally is going to be affected by how you manage your situation and your life externally. And I've got some advice for anyone reading St. Theophan The Recluse and his works like The Path to Salvation. All of his advice is just assuming that you've dealt with the external aspects of your life and that's all fine, more or less, or you're able to get by, and now you can focus on the internal aspects of your soul. But there is going to be a conflict because he is going to be talking about church attendance, he is going to be talking about asceticism, and what that's going to look like for someone in a modern Western parish in the diaspora, even if whether they're so-called cradle Orthodox or so-called converts, is just very different from the assumptions that St. Theophan is working with while he's writing to his audience. So, the end of that spiel is just to say, use your brain to understand what's going on in your life and the circumstances of your life. And now, if that's all pretty much, you've got a handle on all of that, now with regard to the path of salvation in the interior of your soul, now we can do some things with your intellect. All right, so what are we going to do with one's intellect, assuming that we've got time and resources to do it? Well, the work here, we can call it info gathering, we can call it research. Now, for him, it would be things like reading spiritual fathers, reading scripture, reading the lives of the saints, listening to sermons and homilies, listening to elders give discourse, talking to other lay people, getting information that way, discussing things with your peers, with other lay people, or with your elders. So what we can do is add the internet to our research gathering thing. Not just videos, but also webinars and seminars and discussion groups, Discord service, and so on as well. So use your brains to do your research and get good information. Now, what kind of things will you be looking at? Well, your info gathering will, of course, be about scripture. It'll be covering spiritual works. It'll cover church history. It'll cover the lives of the saints. It'll cover dogmatics and theology. It'll cover modern apologetics as well as ancient apologetics. Church relations, especially in the diaspora. We've got multiple jurisdictions. So get your mind around that. The political aspects involved. There's a war going on at the moment, isn't there? Contemporary history and ancient history. Getting your mind around those things is one of your duties in your intellectual work. Now we're going to go on to the next part, the vigilance of the will, but we're going to bring our brain to it. So we're still doing our intellectual work, but we're going to bring that to bear on our will. And what is our will going to be concerning itself with? Well, it's going to be concerning itself with our church life and also our home life. So use your brain now to analyse what life in your parish or the parishes available to you are like. Do some analysis. What can be your involvement in supporting the church services or the activities or the administration of your parish? Do you live far from a parish? What is the only solution going to be geographical, but you can't solve that geographical problem? Will you, in the diaspora, have to attend multiple parishes for the lack of priests? Often there isn't a liturgy every Sunday in one particular parish. Are your parishes ethnically based? What issues is that causing? Are there competing parishes? Is there strife between parishes in your city? Are there competing personalities even within one parish? Are there factions in your parish? Get your brain around these things. How much are languages or customs and the observation of those things integral to your parish? So what's the political flavour of your parish? What's the political flavour of your priest or bishop? What kind of things are they saying? And some of these parishes, especially in the last decades, were post-communist, and often clergy, might have been, officers in the secret services. So that's still an issue for many people coming from parishes in countries that were formerly communist, for example. So that does raise the moral issues of the clergy in certain parishes, for example, and I think we have to do our duty and intellectually address the morality, the moral authority of those people in our parishes, and balance that against, not being the judge of clergy, but we can still pay attention to their morals. All right. What about your own family life? Are you the only Orthodox in your family or not? If you're not yet married, how are you going to meet a future spouse? If you're a teenager and you're not in control of your home environment or the food that you're eating, how are you going to be dealing with that? So, and when it comes to pilgrimages, for example, how are you going to make pilgrimages to monasteries if you live very, very far away from them? So you need to get your brain around these things. So now we can start the second topic, which is the will and being vigilant in managing the irascible or affective part of yourself in order to keep yourself on the path to salvation, as St. Theophan is calling it. So we broke it down into two categories of church life and prayer life at home. So let's talk about church life. Well, services, obviously, the Divine Liturgy every Sunday. How are you going to do that? Are you going to use your will to make sure you go to liturgy on a Sunday? Or are we just going to see you maybe twice a year or once every 2 years in church? confession. Have you ever made confession? Do you know what that is? Some people don't. They've been cradle Orthodox for their whole life. What about house blessings or memorial services? So St. Theophan is talking a lot about your involvement in church life and church services will be the way that you are vigilant with regard to your will. And let's get more specific about that. In this middle part of the soul, according to the old Platonic model, the sins that would occur here would be avarice, greed, or it would be depression, melancholy, or it would be rage and wrath. So when it comes to attending church services, by applying your will to take part in the liturgy, to make confession regularly, to hold memorial services for your Orthodox relatives and family members who are deceased, or even artos for commemoration of the living, for health, lighting candles in church, and praying for those. All of these will train your will, especially with regard to those areas covered by those sins of depression, of greed, and of rage. And the model of the church being a hospital in this regard is really, really appropriate here. Now, as well as church life, there's your life at home, there's your prayer life at home. And again, the vigilance of your will being applied here to your prayer rule at home, your formal prayer rule that's been determined and organised by you and your spiritual guide together. How diligently you're doing that will be, again, shaping your will. You can see that if you've got a will that just does whatever it wants whenever it gets an impulse, you can see that these church services and prayer rules at home are kicking back against that impulsive yielding of one's will to just immediately follow any little tangent that occurs to it. So anyway, let's carry on. Prayer life at home. At work, while you're travelling, the Jesus prayer. At home, blessings of meals, blessings of your house, blessings of objects, blessing of, if you're in a rural environment, your domestic stock or your agricultural stock. Okay, what else? Prayer life at home. Who's your spiritual guide? Have you got one? Because we've got to contrast this. A specific spiritual guide that knows you very, very well supplements what we were talking about with the kind of thing that you might get in church or you might get online. So I'm jumping out of the category here. But there's general spiritual advice of a pastoral nature that isn't specifically tailored to you that you should know about. But now I come back to our category of vigilance with the will and prayer life at home. Your own spiritual guide who knows you very well and understands the circumstances of your life, your work environment, the social situations that you're getting into, the social media that you're looking at, and so on. That would be a very useful way for you to consciously train your will upon the things that are making up your church life and your prayer life at home. So now we're going to move on to the third aspect, but again our will is going to be involved here. So this third aspect is sobriety of the senses, the appetitive, somatic, physical part of ourselves, but we are going to be bringing our intellect and our will into this as well. So how does it work? We use our brains to train our will, and we use our will to train our senses. Right, so obviously fasting, but fasting not just from food, but also regulating your sleep, allowing yourself some regulated relaxation, some recreation, some entertainment even. Employ some media for those purposes, with guarding your senses with regard to the kind of things that you are letting in through your eyes and your ears. I mean, personally I find going to the supermarket really awful for my ears because the lyrics of the songs are just so disturbing. Anyway, let's keep on this track regarding sobriety of the senses. We'll have to include medicines here, I'd say, whether they're psychotropic or for purely physical ailments. Are you going to take your medicines or not, and why? If you're are you doing sports competitively? Do you have to maintain some physical condition for competitive purposes? Or are you still not fully grown? Are you still physically developing? What sort of, also in terms of fasting or regulating your experiences, guarding your senses, what kind of environments are you getting into? I mentioned supermarkets, which for me is a pretty gross environment. What other environments are you willing to let yourself get into or not? Because I've heard it said, and I agree with this, whatever you let in through your senses will get into your heart. Your eyes, your ears, the thoughts, your imagination, they'll all end up in your heart. And now, from your heart, when the intellective part of your mind goes down into the heart, it will bring those things out of your heart up into your mind, including into your nous. And if there's pretty awful things there in your heart, those things will be there in your nous as well, and your nous won't be working very well. So there's a bit of a loop, and the governing part of your mind, the intellective part of your mind, should be guarding your senses to keep rubbish out of your heart, so that there's no rubbish from your heart to go up into your nous. And this is a way of keeping your nous clarified. So there's another part of fasting which I think can affect some lay people, which monks probably don't understand. Monks don't talk much, but social gatherings, social situations, talking, idle talk, hours and hours of it. I would say that guarding one's tongue as well as one's ears is probably to be included in terms of fasting and in terms of sobriety or soberness of one's senses, managing the appetitive parts of your body. So anyway, just to be comprehensive, what are those three simple aspects of that third appetitive part? It'll be sloth, it'll be out of control reproductive urges, and it will be gluttony. So in Christian life, keeping a handle on all of those things during fasting periods and even outside of fasting periods, it's all laid out there according to custom, and got to apply that to 21st century, 22nd century, what century are we in? Modern life. And coming back to the second category, the will, church life and home life, the icons, the incense, your spiritual books, your prayer books, your posture when you're doing your sign of the cross, your prayer rope, your Comboskini, and all of your observation of practice, religious practice, prayerfully at church or at home, will be there to rein in and give you skill in focusing your will. And coming back to our first category, the intellective part, the noetic faculty and the anoetic faculty, so the spiritual part of our intellect that can understand godly things, and just the sheer brainy part that we use to analyze. That's hopefully going to be going well for you. So we'll stop now just to finally summarize. So for Saint Theophan, he's saying, okay, be attentive with your mind, be vigilant with your will, and be sober with your senses. Now, my own private thoughts here as a postscript is use your brains to be intelligent and acknowledge that your 20th century, whatever the century is, 22nd century, 21st century, use your brain to know that your situation is not the same as St. Theophan's. You might not even have a church you can go to, or the church you do go to might be only one and it might not be functioning very well. You might not have an Orthodox family that supports you. Your immediate family might not be Orthodox, let alone you might not even have an extended family support around you. Your work situation, your geographic situation, you might not be supported in the way that St. Theophan is envisaging. So the point is that grace can still reach you even in spite of all of these circumstantial deficiencies. And when that happens, grace covers it. You still get grace, and that's the main thing. That's what you're aiming for anyway. And St. Theophan makes this point anyway. None of this will supply grace. Grace is separate from all of these things. All of these things are just a duty that we have to do. We hope grace will come. And if grace comes, then there'll be a successful outcome. And if not, there won't, but that's all right. We repent anyway. So we rely on grace even if we can't solve all of these problems that we're facing. The only problem when we do read works like The Path to Salvation by St. Theophan is that he presupposes that we don't have any of these impediments in front of us, and that it can actually cause a bit of depression or despair when we find we're being told by St. Theophan to do this and do that with our mind, with our will and with our senses, but we actually can't do it because of maybe our psychosocial history hasn't set up too well for it, let alone our current circumstances in life. So use your brains to apply what St. Theophan is saying, but apply them according to your circumstances and not to his circumstances, because grace is the same for him as well as for you and me, and we still have to aim, I would say, to using our mind, our intellect well, and using our will properly, and being vigilant with regard to how we use it, and being sober and guarding our senses. That doesn't change. That's the same for St. Theophan as much as it is for us as well. So that's it.